What is going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 60 of the Clutch Dump. I'm your host, Benjamin Walther, and sitting across from me is no one, because I don't know where Nick is this morning. I don't know when else I can record this week, so I'm going to go ahead and do this one solo. Nick, don't be mad. But we do have some motorsport to talk about from this past weekend. We have the New England Forest Rally from the American Rally Association. We have Formula Drift Round 5. We have NASCAR. We have INDYcar. We have World Superbike. And then I'm also going to touch on this past weekend's Goodwood Festival of Speed. Stay tuned for all of that and more on this episode of The Clutch Dump.
20 years of trying, 20 years.
And Senna sprints away.
Down the straight, Rossi's right in behind Lorenzo.
The 101st Indianapolis 500 is won by Takuma Sato. Dale Earnhardt will come to the caution flag to win the Daytona 500.
Now, talking about the New England Forest Rally, once again, we saw Brandon Semeniuk and Keaton Williams on the top step of the podium in their 2021 Subaru WRX STI prepped by Vermont Sports Cars. In second, we saw Patrick Gruska and his co-driver in their 2019 Hyundai i20N. I'm assuming that's similar to the car that Ken Block campaigned last year. And then on the third step of the podium was Miguel Granados and Mark Marty, his co-driver, in their 2021 Skoda Fabia Rally 2 Evo 2. It's a heck of a name, Skoda. Put a shorter name on your rally cars. They finished off your podium. Brandon Semeniuk did a total time of 31 minutes and 11 seconds, and Patrick was 2 minutes behind him, and Miguel was just 1 minute, not even 45 seconds behind Patrick. So it looked like a pretty close New England Forest Rally. Every time I see footage from these stages, that always look like a really good time. I love the New England Forest Rally. It's always a very pretty rally and not incredibly long. Touching on Leah Block and her 2013 Subaru BRZ, that's the snow rally liveried car that has the same livery as her dad's, I think it was an 05 Subaru STI did. She's racing in open two-wheel drive. She came first in her class, 7th overall with a time of 36 minutes, 21.5. So well done to Leah Block. Lucy Block in limited four-wheel drive finished 9th overall, 3rd in her class in her 2021 Ford Fiesta Rally 3 with a time of 36:31.4. So that is going to do it for your New England Forest Rally. Brandon Semeniuk still leads the championship by a substantial margin. I think he might actually have it locked in at this point, but that is a heck of a car, and Brandon is a heck of a driver, so I would be surprised if anyone can catch up to him this year. Speaking of sideways, we're going to move from gravel to tarmac, because this past weekend we had round 5 of Formula Drift in St. Louis. Honestly, a result I was pretty surprised by. Formula Drift can do some things like that. So your podium on the top step, Odie Bakshies. If you've been following Formula Drift for a long time, you are familiar with his name. He won a championship several years ago. I cannot remember when that was, but he campaigns an a Pro-Charged LS swapped S15 fuel suspension liveried car. Frederick Osbo, your championship leader, in second position, and then Simon Olsen finished third. So well done to Simon Olsen. I believe that's 2 podiums in a row, if memory serves me right. Some fan favorites. Matt Field did not make it past the top 16 because he battled Odie Bakshies, and we know how that turned out. Adam LZ did not make it past the top 32 because he battled Matt Field. Carnage Carney did not make it past the Great 8. He did make it through to the top 16, or sorry, did not make it through the top 16. My apologies there. Chelsea Denofa did not make it past the Great 8. He had a battle with Chris Forsberg. Forsberg battled with Osbo. Obviously, you know how that turned out. And I think that is going to do it for our Formula Drift results. Osbo in first position with 303 points. Matt Field is down just 15 points in second position. And Odie Bakshies jumps past Chelsea Denofa to third position, just 30 points down. Chelsea Denofa is 40 points behind Frederick Osbo. Simon Olsen also closing up that gap in fifth position with 43 points behind Frederick Osbo with 260 points. That is going to do it for our Formula Drift coverage. This past weekend, we had the Crayon 301 for the NASCAR Cup Series, and Martin Truex Jr. did find himself on the top step of the podium. Joey Logano second, Kyle Larson third, Kevin Harvick fourth, Brad Keselowski 5th, Tyler Reddick 6th, Denny Hamlin 7th, Darrell Wallace Jr. 8th, Austin Dillon 9th, Chase Briscoe 10th. I'm not going to go through all of your results because there's 36 people and we would be here for a while. If you're on the YouTubes, I will put up the full results here, but that is your Cup Series results. We do have the Pocono 400 coming up at Pocono Raceway July 23rd, so stay tuned for results then. More racing. We had IndyCar this past weekend, Honda Indy Toronto on the streets of Toronto. This is round 10 of the 2023 IndyCar NTT Series. Your official results, a first-time winner, Christian Lundgaard, the 22-year-old, because he's a year older than me. Christian Lundgaard putting in his first ever race win on the streets of Toronto. An outstanding result from him. And your championship leader, Alex Palou, coming in second. Colton Herta, third. Scott Dixon, fourth. Joseph Newgarden, fifth. Scott McLaughlin in sixth. Marcus Armstrong in seventh. Pato O'Ward, 8th, Graham Rahal, 9th, Felix Rosenquist, 10th, Marcus Ericsson, 11th, Augustin Canapino, I always mess that up, I am sorry. Renus VK was in 13th, Will Power crossed the line 14th, Kyle Kirkwood 15th, Alexander Rossi in 16th, Santino Ferrucci in 17th, Callum Ilott came 18th, Stingray Robb with the best name in the sport came 19th, David Malukas 20th, Helio Castroneves in 21st, Roman Grosjean 22nd, Devlin DeFrancesco 23rd, Jack Harvey 24th, Tom Blomqvist came 25th, Ryan Hunter Ray came 26th, and Benjamin Peterson came 27th. Your overall standings for the 2023 are similar to how they were last race. Alex Palou leads the championship by storm with 417 points over Scott Dixon, who has a mere 300. Joseph Newgarden is close behind in that third position with 291. Marcus Ericsson fourth with 275, followed very closely by Pato O'Ward, 1 point down with 274. Let's see what our next race of the season is. We have the Hy-Vee Homefront 250 July 22nd, so stay tuned for results and updates from that. This past weekend, we had 7th round of the 2023 World Superbike season, and it was a very similar sight. Starting off the weekend, race 1, I'm only going to go through your top 3 because there's 3 races and that would take forever. So, your top 3 from race 1, no surprise to anybody, Alvaro Bautista continues his very dominant streak this year, followed closely by Toprak Razgatlioglu. Very common sight to see him on that second step. And then once again, Jonathan Ray coming third. For those of you wondering, Danilo Petrucci came 6th, Scott Redding came 10th. Those are just some personal favorites. So that's where they landed. Moving on to the Super Bowl race. This is where things started to shake up for the weekend. Toprak Razgatlioglu came first. Andrea Locatelli came second. And Axel Bassani came third. Alvaro Bautista came fourth off the podium in this weekend's Super Bowl race. Moving on to race 2, once again, another surprise. Toprak Razgatlioglu taking the top step for that Yamaha YZF R1. Axel Bassani came second, and Jonathan Ray once again on that third step of the podium. Alvaro Bautista DNF'd, crashing out on the opening lap of the Italian round of World Superbike. Moving on to your championship standings, Alvaro Bautista has a commanding lead with 391 points. 70 points behind him is Toprak Razgatlioglu, like we've talked about this season. Andrea Locatelli is at 208 points, which is very far behind Toprak. Everything gets much closer behind them. Jonathan Ray with 201 points in third, 179 points for Axel Bassani, so on and so forth. Moving on, let's see, when is our next round of World Superbike? We will have round 8, the Czech round, the 28th and 30th of July. So not this weekend, but the coming weekend, we will have round 8 of World Superbike. Now, I kind of sped through that, and that is because I want to talk about the Goodwood Festival of Speed. This is one of my favorite events every year. I love the Goodwood Festival of Speed. It's kind of the new, I think this is I don't know if this is what all motor shows are going to switch to, but I'm always a big fan of the Goodwood Festival of Speed. I think it's just super interesting that they've been running an event for so long and they've changed it so little. All they've done is just more. So, and the big thing is this is 30 years of Goodwood Festival of Speed. So 1993, I guess, is what that would have been. They started Goodwood Festival of Speed. It was one day. It was kind of a smaller group of people, kind of just hanging out in a field and running cars up some dude's driveway. This year, 4 days, parties, giant booths, giant tents, huge event. So not only are there timed runs up the hill, but there is also there are now companies that debut their latest and greatest at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, which is always exciting because it's nice to see an event outside of the Geneva, Paris, New York Motor Show getting some recognition and becoming so popular with the OEM. So I'm going to run through some things that were there, and then I'll comment on them as I talk about them. We saw the dynamic debut of the Lamborghini Revuelto, however you want to pronounce it. That is the Aventador replacement. That's the NA V12 hybrid system with that weird longitudinal V12 transverse dual clutch setup in the rear. It was in a very bright orange like we saw in all of the release photos. And it did make its dynamic debut. It was not doing any fast runs. I'm assuming the car isn't like tip-top shape and is not perfectly ready to be doing aggressive runs up the hill, but it did make its dynamic debut, which is cool. We got to hear it a bit, so that was nice. The McLaren Solus GT was kind of the talk of the weekend as far as dynamic debuts go. So if you're unfamiliar with this car, Nick and I talked about it a few episodes back. So the Solus GT started out as the McLaren Vision Gran Turismo. You've probably seen a couple OEMs do this. Ferrari's done a bunch of them. Maserati did a couple. Jag's done a couple. But McLaren, a couple years ago, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, did the Vision Gran Turismo. And it was this very weird, powered by a V8. And the driver actually laid on their stomach and faced forward. It was a very weird car. Obviously, that doesn't meet pedestrian safety laws or just passenger safety laws by any means. But McLaren has gone and decided to build this car. So the Solus GT, single-seater, carbon tub, pushrod suspension. It's not an open-wheel car, but it's not really a closed-wheel car. It's this weird prototype thing. It has a 5.2-liter V10, which is not from Audi Lamborghini. It's a completely different engine. It is a race car. You've got to preheat the motor for an hour before you can drive it, cycle the coolant and the oil and everything, get the tolerances up to spec before you can drive it. Sounds fantastic. It's got this, I think it's a 6 or a 7-speed paddle shift sequential, which is fantastic, but it's got a cool automated clutch system, so you can leave the line in gear and not have to operate the clutch, make it easier for billionaires to drive them, so to speak. So it was doing timed runs this weekend, which we'll talk about when we get to the timed runs. Aston Martin had the Valkyrie Spider and the AMR Pro out there this weekend, which was super cool to see. No one's really seen the Spider, so to speak. I mean, not many people have seen Valkyries in general. There are a couple on the road, but as far as automotive journalists go, a lot of people haven't touched them outside of like Top Gear and those sort of people. So to see the Spider was super cool. I didn't think it looked quite good, even though I do miss the gull-wing doors, but obviously no roof, you can't do gull-wing doors. And the AMR Pro is just an absolute bananas of a car. And obviously the Aston Martin DB12 was there, which we talked about in episode 58. I believe it was. So the DB12 was there doing timed runs, which was super cool to see that. Another car, which we talked about a while ago, but kind of fell through the cracks, was the Maserati Gran Turismo Trofeo. So this is not the base model car, but this is not the top of the line car. So the Gran Turismo Trofeo has the 3-liter twin-turbo V6, I think it is, out of the MC20. I know it's the MC20 motor. I can't remember if it's 3 liters or 3.2 or whatever. It has the 3-liter twin-turbo V6 out of the MC20, making 550, 600 horsepower, something like that. So that is the top of the line for the V6 that you can get. I don't know if they're going to offer a V8, but I know that you can get an electric version, which makes like 8,000 horsepower, because they all do. So there was the Gran Turismo Trofeo, and there will be a Gran Turismo Modena, however you want to pronounce it, and that will be 100 horsepower down from that car. Hyundai had some super cool cars out there, some of which didn't end so great. But they had the Envision 74, which is the super cool current car based on an old concept car that was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro. So everyone's like, oh, that's the Hyundai that looks like the DeLorean. Yes, because Giugiaro designed the original car and Giugiaro designed the DeLorean. Super cool, electric, hydrogen, fuel cell, super cool. Apparently, actually going into production, which is fantastic. I'm super excited to see how Hyundai does in the future. They're putting out a lot of really cool products. They also debuted the Ioniq 6N, which is super cool. That is their new kind of mid-size crossover SUV performance thing. Fully electric. It's the first fully electric car to get the N badge. We've only seen it on the Elantra and the Veloster so far, and other things in other countries like the i20N. But this is the first thing that we will see that is electric that has the N badge on it. So the Ioniq 6, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, is like 650 horsepower and like 800 pound-feet of torque. It's a crazy amount of power to have in a little puff blue SUV. So Hyundai putting out some fantastic products right now. And the best of them being this Envision 74. Hopefully we get to see more of that in the future. Now, every few years we get a treat, and that is a Ferrari one-off. So if you are really good friends with Ferrari, we're not talking you bought a 488 and maybe you bought an F12. We're talking you've bought 20, 30 cars. You're at the front of the line to get all the latest and greatest. You own several LaFerraris kind of customer. Maybe an old F1 car too. You can commission a one-off car. And every few years we get these weird one-offs. And this year we got one called the Ferrari KC23. Now, the KC, if you're wondering what that stands for, is usually the initials of the person who commissioned the build. So like Eric Clapton had one commissioned a couple years ago, and it was like the EC18 or whatever. The number is usually the year that it's built. Sometimes it's not, but it usually is. So this is a beautiful car, sculpted, much less angular than we see on most of the Ferrari cars, excluding like the Roma and the Portofino. But it's underneath, it is a 488 GT3 car, so track only. But it's supposed to look like it was carved out of one block of marble or something. It's just supposed to flow. And then you open it all up, the hood, the rear clamshell, the doors, which have butterfly doors, scissor doors. I can't remember which one it was. It's got doors that go up. But based on this 488 GT3, it's supposed to be a more sculpted, pretty version that looks pretty sitting still. Then you open it up and it looks very, very aggressive. Very pretty car. We didn't get to see, I don't think we saw a timed run out of that car. At least it didn't post one that was substantial. After that, we had the Bentley Batour, which I really like. I've kind of got a soft spot for Bentleys at the moment. I'm kind of enjoying the large two-door coupes from Bentley and Rolls at the moment, which we'll get to in a second. But the Bentley Batour marks the final W12 Bentley, which is kind of a shame. Not like that motor was particularly exciting. It didn't sound particularly good. It's just kind of cool that they still made it in a time when we have things like, I don't know, BMW i3s and Nissan Leafs, that someone was making a twin-turbo W12. This is the final W12 Bentley, 750 horsepower, all-carbon body, $1.75 million. They're only making 18, and I'm very sorry, but if you haven't bought one, you can't. They've sold them all out. Very customizable. You can pick, you can go and pick what block of metal they carve all of your aluminum out of. You can pick what tree they cut your dash out of. It's super customizable. I think all 18 of them, Bentley said, will look substantially different. So super cool car to see. I think it's very pretty. Underneath it is just a Continental GTC, which is kind of a shame that, you're essentially paying almost $2 million for a Continental, which underneath is a Volkswagen Phaeton. So at some point, you're paying $2 million for just a Volkswagen. Beautiful car. I think it's outstanding, and I'm kind of glad that Bentley brought one out for the world to see. Speaking of big two-door luxury cars, the Rolls-Royce Spectre was out for the people to see. If you don't follow a lot of people on YouTube that do car reviews, you won't have seen that the Rolls-Royce Spectre reviews came out just a couple weeks ago, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I watched a couple of videos on that. So the Rolls-Royce Spectre is their first electric vehicle, and what I've heard from everyone, or from all the reviews, is that is absolutely outstanding. It is the most Rolls-Royce that there has ever Rolls-Royced. So the Spectre was out there. It was the gold car with white interior that they used for all of the release photos. So that was very pretty. And if you see videos of it, like Shmee150 did a video on it where it drove by, the car is huge. Like, I think underneath it's like phantom sized, but it's like the length and the height of an Escalade, but it's a two-door car. It's massive. I love that car. Moving on to some racier things, the Garage 56 NASCAR was there. Always fun to see that. They did have all three drivers out there doing runs over the weekend. So Mike Rockenfeller, Jenson Button, and Jimmy Johnson were out there doing runs. Jenson Button was hopping back and forth between that and the Radford Type 62-2 Pikes Peak car, the car that Tanner Faust ran at Pikes Peak for a class win just several weeks ago. That was there as well. So that was super cool to see. Fan favorite. They did some donuts and burnouts and stuff. The Bugatti Bolide made its second dynamic debut. This is the matte black car. Looks very menacing. The blue car made its dynamic debut at the 24 Hours of Le Mans back in June, which I got to see, which was fantastic. Always fun to see that car. Very popular, that car. Super cool. I think a lot of people like the fact that Bugatti did a racing car, despite the fact that most of them will probably never see the track, sadly. Moving on to some proper race cars. Mick Schumacher drove his dad's W02. That is his Mercedes Formula One car. Obviously, Mick Schumacher being a Mercedes reserve driver, they have access to all of the old Mercedes F1 cars. So he wore his dad's old suit, his dad's famous red helmet, and drove the W02 up the hill, which was super cool. He got to do some donuts. That was a very touching moment for everyone. Sebastian Vettel brought out a couple of his personal cars. He brought out his Williams FW14B and his McLaren MP48. That MP48 is an Ayrton Senna driven car, so it's super cool to see those. Both of those running on synthetic fuels. If you're not aware, Sebastian Vettel is very kind of pro environment and trying to help the environment in the best way that he can, and doing that, with his kind of fame and through racing and that sort of thing. So super cool to see those run. Did some donuts. It was a good time. Pagani brought out some showstoppers. They had the new Utopia in that same tan over brown and white car that did some runs up the hill, some pretty fast runs, I heard, and the Huayra R, which is that naturally aspirated V12 track only version. Speaking of naturally aspirated V12s, the Gordon Murray Automotive T50 was there. This is the blue car, was doing runs up the hill. Don't think any of them were substantial enough to be on the leaderboard, but I think they had passengers in all the runs, so not super surprising there. Lotus had quite the booth there. It was huge, which is impressive for what was a small company. Lotus now being owned by Geely. So it was nice to see Lotus getting a lot of press and a lot of publicity for such a small British manufacturer. They had the Via out there, their new 2,000 horsepower electric hypercar thingy. They had a bunch of mirrors out there, and they had the new Electra SUV out as well. There was also the Hispana Suiza Carmen Boulogne. I can't pronounce it, and that's why I put it on the list. I've never heard of it. It's a weird Spanish carbon fiber hypercar thing. I don't know. I didn't know that we needed more electric hypercars, but I saw it and I can't pronounce it, so I put it on the list. Super cool. There'll be a picture here. Singer brought out a suite of cars. So there was the DLS Turbo, this thing that Nick and I talked about just a few episodes ago. That's the reimagined Porsche 9345, the IMSA race car from the 70s and 80s. So they brought that car out. They brought the silver one out, not the orange one. The orange car was sitting on a stand, at least. The silver car was doing runs. Very loud, that car. Surprisingly loud was that car. And then they also brought out a DLS, which is the NA 4.2 liter car. And they also brought out a Turbo Study, which is a 930 Turbo reimagined by Singer, which was super cool. Koenigsegg got a ton of press this past week and bringing out a suite of cars. The new production-ready Gemera, which if you did not see, I know we haven't talked about it yet. The new Gemera, which is their 4-seat mega car, as they're calling it. I don't know where we're going to go next after mega car. but it's their 4-seat mega car, which was debuted with this, I think it was called a Tiny Huge Giant or whatever it was. It's this little, like, 2-liter inline turbo inline 3 that made like 900 horsepower. You can still get that, but you can also get the twin turbo 5-liter V8 out of a Jesko in this car. So you can option your 4-door sedan up to 2,300 horsepower if you so desire. They also had out a Jesko, a beautiful Jesko in blue, and they also had the CC850. It's the one with the weird trick manual automatic 8-speed, but it's a 6-speed witchcraft gearbox. So that was super cool. Koenigsegg getting a ton of publicity, which is super cool to see all these smaller supercar manufacturers getting a ton of press. And then from the good old US of A, the Zinger 21C was out there. I don't believe it was doing any timed runs. I think they just had it out on display, but that car is fascinating to me. So it was fun to see that out there. It's a twin turbo V8. All of the structures and everything, like the whole car is 3D printed titanium and Inconel. So it's super cool to see that thing out there. I'm sure there were more cars there. Obviously, there were more cars there, but those are just the ones that stood out to me. I'm going to go through our 10 fastest runs up the Goodwood hill climb. So if you're unfamiliar with Goodwood, there's the show and then there's the hill climb. The hill climb is really the point of it, but there's a bit more show than hill climb now. So the hill climb is just a driveway. That's what it is. It is not a racetrack. It is not prepped. It is just a driveway, which means it is unforgiving and it is narrow and it is not designed to drive fast on. But we've decided, as human beings, because we're idiots, to drive fast on it anyway. So these were your 10 fastest runs from the Goodwood Festival of Speed. In 10th, the Manthey GT2 RS Club Sport, putting down a time of 51:45. That's 51 seconds, 0.45, by the way. It's rather short. Even though it's actually a pretty long driveway. The Ferrari 48 Challenge was just faster than it at a 49.88. The Ford Puma WRC went even faster than that at 49.47. You'll start to see as we go down the list that just overall horsepower and pace does not mean you had the fastest run. So Friday, so the event runs Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Friday was raining. Saturday, they canceled it. Sunday, the event was held again. Friday runs, the WRC cars and the all-wheel drive touring cars were the fastest cars to run up the hill. That makes sense. It's tight, it's narrow, it's technical. You have all-wheel drive and cars that are designed to slide around corners. Perfect. So the Puma WRC putting up a very respectable time, 49.47. Rimac Nevera, they get offended by that. Rimac Nevera running that'd be what? Seventh fastest? Seventh fastest with a time of 49.32. In front of that was the Chrysler Viper GTSR. Yes, that is correct. Chrysler Viper GTSR. That is the Gen 3 Viper car that raced at Le Mans. Ran a time of 48.29. So shout out to the dude who was wheeling a flame-spitting Viper up the hill this past weekend. Very impressive time. Even more impressive than that, faster than a current WRC car, a GT2 RS Club Sport, a 48 Challenge, was a Calsonic Skyline GTR. This is the very famous Nissan Skyline GTR R32 from the Japanese touring car days. Won everything. It's how the Skyline got its nickname. Godzilla was this car. And it ran up the hill in a time of 48.18. Incredibly quick from that car. Very fascinating to see how well even old race cars can do up here. But not old race cars. New race cars, the 992 GT3 Cup car in a very cool livery. Ran a time of 47.40 up the hill. Faster than that, though, third fastest over the weekend was the 1976 McLaren Cosworth M26. So this is running the Cosworth DFV motor, very famous motor for its sound. But this car ran a 46.89 as the first car to touch the 46s over the weekend. Impressive to see how fast an old F1 car can run up this hill. I can't imagine if you could get a current F1 car to A, stick, and B, maneuver up this hill. It's very tight, and F1 cars have gotten kind of big. That's probably why you don't see him do timed runs up the hill. But even faster than that was a Subaru from 1983. Not really. It was a 1983 Subaru GL known as the Family Huckster. This is the car co-developed between Hoonigan Racing Division and Vermont Sports Cars for Travis Pastrana when he did his Gymkhana video. Super cool wagon, carbon-bodied, tube chassis. It's running the same motor that Brandon Simnick runs in his WRX STI that he runs in ARA, except it's making like 900 horsepower. It's got active aero so that when he goes over jumps, it lands flat or whatever. So last year, he was 5th overall. Sorry, last year he was 2nd overall. 2021, he was 5th overall. And this year he was 2nd overall again with a time of 46.38. But your fastest run overall was the McLaren Solus GT. It ran a time of 45.34. Now, if you're thinking that's incredibly quick, yes, it is. Just a reminder, the record for the Goodwood Hill Climb is nearly 7 seconds faster than that. I think I did like the spread of fastest time this weekend to, it was like 22nd place is the time from fastest this weekend to the lap record. So that is held by the McMurtry Spearling, set last year by one Max Chilton. The Spearling was there this weekend, but they were running the McMurtry Spearling Pure, as they're calling it, which is the street version. It's the more mild, only makes like 1,500 horsepower version. So they weren't running the full kill race version, so it did not set any full times. Now here is a section that I am kind of looking forward to, kind of not looking forward to, called In the Bales. So something to note about the Goodwood Hill Climb is there isn't guardrails. There isn't runoff, really. There's a bit of runoff, but it's about 5 feet of runoff, and then hay bales. Honestly, because hay bales are really good at stopping cars. So this section is called In the Bales because there were several cars, many of them very expensive, that went off in the bales. So there is a corner at the Goodwood Festival of Speed called Moulcom, and Moulcom is a left-hander. And I was listening to an interview with Andrew Frankel. If you don't know who Andrew Frankel is, what's wrong with you? Go find out who Andrew Frankel is. He's one of the greatest automotive journalists of all time. But Andrew Frankel runs some fantastic things up the hill every year because has been at all of the Goodwood Festival of Speed since the first one. He ran cars up the hill at the first Goodwood Festival of Speed. So he's been doing this a long time. So this year he ran up a 91730 Porsche. But pretty much what he said, so Moulcom is a left-hander, but there's a crest right before the left-hander. And pretty much what he said is if you brake when you see the corner, you've already crashed. You just don't know it yet. So you have to brake before you see the corner. So it's super tricky and tricks up a lot of people. Also, it's super narrow, and a lot of these cars are Le Mans cars, F1 cars. So if you get on it and they spin, you don't have a ton of room to correct. It's only like 1.5 lanes wide, so to speak. So the most notable crash of the weekend, or the one that got, sadly, the most publicity for them, was the Hyundai RN22E. Now, we talked about this a while back. It'd be like episode 40 or something, maybe even before that. So this is one of the cars that Hyundai has been campaigning around the world. Super interesting. RN22E. It is a hydrogen. I can't remember if it's hydrogen electric. I think it's hydrogen electric, hence the 22E part. So it is a hydrogen electric, kind of looks like an Elantra N, but it is a hydrogen electric touring car. It's kind of their vision for the future of touring cars. But here's the thing. It's electric. It's hydrogen powered. It weighs like 2 tons. It's a very heavy car. Basically what happened is the driver, which supposedly was an automotive journalist. I don't know. If so, that might put a dent in the career. But regardless, RN22E comes up over the crest, brakes, and understeers straight into the hay bales, going through about 5 layers of hay bales, which thankfully they put that many there, but that's because they've been doing this for a few years. They know where people crash. So RN22E, in spectacular fashion, went into the bales. Now, this is where things start to hurt if you have some mechanical sympathy and like old race cars. the McLaren F1 GTR. This is the black and red, black and orange, whatever you want to call it, the Lark liveried F1 GTR. This specific car ran in Super GT over in Japan for a season. Very famous car, supposedly worth about 25, maybe $30 million. It's McLaren F1 GTR. And just, I think it was just before Moulcom or just after Moulcom, basically, driver touched the grass on the right side. Very easy to do. Like I said, narrow. F1's a big car, so to speak. It just touched the grass, and it basically just sucked him into the hay bales. You can see it going in the hay bales and kind of all the front bodywork flex and Jesus, excuse me. All the front bodywork flex and crack, and I'm assuming that'll be quite the hefty bill to repair. But an even heftier bill is the 1998 Le Mans winning Porsche GT1. If you watched our Le Mans episode, that'll be episode 56, I think. I should know this. But if you watch our Le Mans episode, you will have heard me talk about it. I might even put a picture up of it here. But Porsche had it on display in the constructors paddock at Le Mans. So I'm very pleased to see that. That's the number 26 Porsche GT1. And after Moulcom going up the hill, someone just got a little overzealous, you could say, with the right pedal. And basically the car stepped out, they corrected, but the tail end snapped and slapped a hay bale, ripping the rear wing off the car, and I'm assuming damaging some bodywork on that left-hand rear side. Now, another unfortunate thing was Mercedes had the new Mercedes GT was there. I'm not sure if it's called an AMG GT or not. Basically, this is a replacement for what we currently know as the GT, the GTC, the GTR, and GTR Pro, and the GTR Black Series. So the new Mercedes GT was there. Full camo livery. You can't see it, obviously. Now, something to note about the Goodwood Hill climb is you've probably seen videos of not a roundabout, but a cul-de-sac where cars come in, do a donut or two, and then go back out, right? Well, apparently whoever was driving the new Mercedes GT, which supposedly was a pro driver, comes in, does a donut, perfectly fine, then decides, I'll go back for seconds. Goes to do a second donut, doesn't quite get the wheel spin, car grips up, and shoots him straight into a bank, because this cul-de-sac is kind of sunk down and surrounded on almost all sides, except for where you drive in and out, by a hill, essentially. So basically, they did a donut and then stuffed it into the wall. Rather unfortunate, probably just some cosmetic damage, not a huge deal, but still not how Mercedes wanted to do the public debut of this car, so to speak. Now, that same corner, Moulcom cut out another car, which is the BMW M1 Pro car. If you're unfamiliar with this series, the M1 was the first M car before the M3, before the M5, before the M6, all of that was the M1. And to promote the M1, they ran a series called Pro Car, which is basically a helper series, or it ran before Formula One races, essentially. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But it ran before Formula One races, and essentially what they did is they would take wealthy people who bought M1 Pro cars and Formula One drivers and stick them in the same series, and they would race beforehand. So this is an M1 Pro car, same corner. Moulcom comes in, brakes too late, through the hay bales. Not as extravagant as the Hyundai, but probably a bit rare than the Hyundai, or a bit more expensive to repair. And the last car that ended up in the bales was the Leighton House F1 car. Now, I had never heard of Leighton House, but I did do some research into them. So Leighton House basically was the replacement for March, and Leighton House bought the rights to March, and the Leighton House F1 car was actually the first car that a guy named Adrian Newey designed. Now, Adrian Newey, if you're unfamiliar, designs all the cars for Red Bull. So, if you don't like Max Verstappen, blame Adrian Newey. He's the reason why he's really fast. So the Leighton House F1 car, basically going into Moulcom, someone just locked it up, and it spun into the bales, and there was suspension and tires flying off, and that was it. And in our last episode, like Nick talked about, there was that old Jag, I think it was a Mark II, old touring car. It wasn't called touring car, but old race car that had a wheel fly off and go into the crowd. And Goodwood did put out a statement that everyone in that incident is completely okay and made it back to the festival. Now, that's a pretty short episode, but to be fair, I'm only half of the clutch dump. So it is to be expected. That is going to do it for episode 60, covering this weekend's motorsports and the Goodwood Festival of Speed. Like I said at the top of the show, or I didn't at the top of the show. Wow, solo. The more you know. Make sure you go follow us on all of the podcasting platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, Apple, and Google Podcasts, all of those. Make sure you follow us or subscribe, whichever you can do. Leave a rating and a review. It helps us do better, helps us grow, it helps us find a bigger audience. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like and share the video. Comment down below what you thought, what you like to see at Goodwood, other motorsports you want us to cover, and make sure you turn on that notification bell